Hello and welcome to another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the Timberwolves beat the Clippers on Sunday night and are now 3-0 in the preseason. We'll talk the biggest takeaway, plus some additional takeaways. We'll do studs and duds as we always do. A fantastic performance once again by the preseason Minnesota Timberwolves. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I am the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. It's a victory Monday after the Timberwolves beat the Clippers on Sunday night, improved to 3-0 in the preseason. This is the post-game podcast. First of all, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. From Apple to Google, Spotify to Odyssey, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. Also, a reminder that you can get the new Locked On Sports Minnesota app on either Roku or Amazon Fire TV. You can listen to Locked On Wolves as well as all of your other favorite Locked On Minnesota sports podcasts. Available on Roku and Amazon Fire TV, again, as part of the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. More great local sports coverage 24/7. It's absolutely free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on Roku or Amazon Fire. All right, the Timberwolves played the Clippers on Sunday. It was a West Coast late 9:30 p.m. Central tip. And this was Karl-Anthony Towns' preseason debut. Rudy Gobert sat this one out, but the Wolves were otherwise full strength besides Rudy. And they emerged victorious. They're now 3-0 on the preseason. We'll do similar to what we did on Friday's show. So basically a true post-game pod. So if you're new to the show, we'll do a key takeaway first overall here today. Any notable, notes on the game flow, and then we'll do some additional takeaways, kind of the other three things you need to know. And then we'll close with individual studs and duds. The first thing you need to know off the top, again, Towns' debut, Rudy Gobert did not play. The Clippers were basically full strength. They played both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. John Wall started. It was basically, I think, the projected starting lineup for the Clippers. And outside of Norman Powell, I mean, this was basically the Clippers you're going to see in the regular season. Now, of course, neither team was playing their starters or anything close to it by the end of the third quarter, early fourth quarter. So crunch time was strictly bench players for both teams. And, outside of, Terrence Mann is a bench player, but he was basically the only vet that was on the floor for the Clippers down the stretch. So this was a pretty close game. The Wolves were pretty sluggish to start, and we're down 10 at the end of the first quarter, but had a pretty good showing in the second quarter. Third quarter, the Wolves kind of took over. And then this thing was close throughout the fourth, again, with bench units playing, going back and forth. And the Timberwolves bench unit that was, 3/5 rookies, if I recall correctly. Josh Minott, Wendell Moore. Well, I guess Luka Garza is not a rookie, but second-year player, right? And then plus Austin Rivers and Bryn Forbes, a couple of veterans that will be on the fringes of the Wolves rotation this year. That's who closed the game for the Wolves. Got them a 4-point lead with about a minute to play, and they held on to win by 2. The biggest takeaway, though, from this one for me is similar to what it was Friday. Honestly, it was the Timberwolves offense and how creative Chris Finch has been with the offense. And even without Rudy Gobert, the Wolves ran, of course, with in a regular season game, if either Rudy or Towns was out, I would imagine Finch would adjust the game plan and do something a little bit different. But they're still trying to implement, the system on both ends of the floor. So we'll talk about the defense later, but the Wolves also played defensively like they would as if Rudy Gobert was playing, which of course is a dangerous proposition because you can't replicate what Rudy does with anybody. Karl-Anthony Towns, Naz Reid, anybody. But it's preseason, so the actual result of the game didn't matter. It was more about getting the reps in the system, getting guys to play basically the roles that they will play throughout the regular season and beyond. So the offense, again, we saw this in Thursday's win. Lots of dribble handoffs, lots of kind of fun backside actions, pin downs, running shooters onto the perimeter, and allowing the fulcrum of the offense, which is generally going to be Towns, but Rudy will get these opportunities too, to operate from the mid or high post and hit guys that are slipping screens or diving to the rim, hit back cutters, skip passes to 3-point shooters. It's all going to run through outside of the initial, coming out of transition. The Wolves are going to run a lot of pick and roll. As Finch described this, I talked about this on Friday show. Finch said, I think it was the mid quarter or the between first and second quarter interview on ESPN Thursday night, when Finch said they wanted to run a bunch of random pick and rolls was his phrase. The Wolves are going to do pick and roll. They're going to mix it in as part of their secondary break, as part of their transition offense. They're not going to call a ton of half-court pick and roll. It's just a natural reaction that happens as part of the game anyway. And D'Lo's so good at that specifically. He's the one that's best at it for the Wolves. And so they're going to do some of that. But basically all of their set plays that we've seen so far this preseason have flowed through the bigs. So you saw a lot of Karl-Anthony Towns kind of initiating from the mid and high post. There was one particular play that was really, really nice. It was third quarter. Cat was kind of at the elbow, a little bit higher than the elbow. And Jaden McDaniels came up to set a back screen and instead slipped the screen. He came up from the opposite corner, basically faked the screen, and then slipped to the basket. And Towns hit him with a beautiful pass for a bucket. And we saw similar actions throughout the game, kind of out of the dribble handoff action, top of the key, high post, elbow extended mid post type area. And I thought that was really a lot of fun to watch. And again, an indicator of what we're going to see from the Timberwolves offense this season: creativity, offense flowing through bigs, off-ball action. And interestingly, and I guess not surprisingly, the offense looks a little different when it is flowing strictly through Anthony Edwards and or D'Angelo Russell, when they're running a lot of pick and rolls. Ant still had a couple too many possessions where he just decided to make something happen. And he did enough of it in this game. It was pretty good. But it's those moments where he decides, like, hey, I'm going to hold the ball and then I'll take a couple dribbles and shoot a tough mid-range jumper. And I might make it 35, 40% of the time. And then, it looks like a great shot. But that sort of thing is what kind of mucks up what Chris Finch envisions in his half-court offense. And it'll be interesting to see how they kind of balance that. And if Ant and Rudy, Rudy's going to be a vocal teammate and he's going to want his touches. He's also going to want to operate in the flow of the offense. So it'll be interesting to see how that, that push and pull looks once the regular season starts. But all that to say, the offensive creativity was on display in this game. Towns was very good in his first game. He started off slow. I think he missed his first 2 or 3 shots, but then all of a sudden it was a barrage of threes, and we'll talk more about that later. And Towns was really comfortable. Still visibly a little bit, down a little bit in his weight, I think, from the illness, understandably. So I'm sure still trying to get some conditioning back, but was really good once he did kind of, I guess, catch his breath or settle down a little bit, maybe his second stint. So in the second quarter. But also we'll talk more about Naz Reid, trust me. But starting Naz at the 4 again was interesting because, and again, maybe not surprising, because Chris Finch wants to keep Kyle Anderson in his bench role as the backup 4 and keep Naz in a role where he's going to play the 4 next to Towns or play the 4 next to Rudy, depending on matchups and depending on how he's playing. And if Naz plays anything like he has so far this preseason, in the regular season, they're going to have a tough time not putting Naz Reid on the floor. And Chris Finch wouldn't mind that, because maybe it means more Kyle Anderson at the 3. It might just mean less minutes for Taurean Prince, or less minutes for Jalen Noel potentially down the road. And Finch wants to play big. So I don't think he would really be all too bothered if Naz forced his way into the rotation, because it just means more length in the lineup for Chris Finch in the rotation. And that's exactly what he wants. Okay. Next, I want to do I got about 3.5 more takeaways. So we'll do that here next. First of all, let's talk about our friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's really simple. You simply you can create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. Once you create the post, you just add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's time to start thinking about finishing the year strong. We're only, 2.5 months somehow basically 2.5 months away from the end of the calendar year. Finding the right team member for that open job might just help you finish this year strong and get on to 2023. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, additional takeaways from Sunday's Wolves win over the Clippers. I talked a little bit about how Finch had the offense operate just like it would if Rudy was on the floor. They did the same thing defensively for stretches, not the entire time. But we talked at length on the show about how Karl-Anthony Towns is not the best option to be the big involved in screen and roll when they play a drop pick and roll defense. And last season, or go rewind prior to last season, prior to Chris Finch, when David Vanterpool was coordinating the defense, the Wolves, of course, played a lot of drop coverage, meaning that the big was essentially sagging into the paint, allowing a little bit of penetration in order to try and kind of play middleman, play the roller and the man with the ball, which allowed the guard, who's the primary defender on the ball handler, to kind of not be as vital when it comes to defending the pick and roll. It was kind of puts so much of the onus on the big, and that wasn't Towns' strong suit. It contributed to foul trouble for him, which has always been an issue. He's as agile as he is as a big. He wasn't great backpedaling. He never had great feel for where exactly to play, right? It was either he played too high and they were giving up lobs, or he played too low and you gave up mid-range jumpers all day long to the Kyrie Irvings and D'Angelo Russells and players like that who could just eat you up from the mid-range, or are athletic enough that they could still get past you and score. And Towns just really struggled there. So last year the Wolves played more of a high wall blitzing pick and roll coverage for most of the season. I would say pretty much exclusively that's what they played against pick and roll for the first 2/3, 3/4 of the regular season, before mixing in a little bit of drop, a lot more switching, some zone. And that's not necessary when Rudy Gobert's on the floor, because Rudy is fantastic at drop coverage. He's easily the best center in the league at playing drop. And he can, because he's so long and he has such great feel and he's got such a knack for blocking shots. And if you've got him on the back line of your defense, you could really do anything you want. So the Wolves, I think, will play primarily drop coverage, especially when Rudy's in the game. Well, even with no Rudy Gobert in Sunday's preseason game, the Timberwolves played a lot of drop coverage, especially in the second half, and asked Karl-Anthony Towns to play the Rudy role, and he actually did pretty well. One of my other takeaways, which I guess is related to this, so I'll lump them in together, was the defensive aggressiveness in the second half, and primarily the third quarter, when the Wolves had their actual rotation guys, their starting lineup in the game, active hands, playing passing lanes, but not really gambling. There were a couple gambles here and there, but it was really kind of a solid, just active defense. D'Angelo Russell got involved. Ant was involved. Kyle Anderson was fantastic defensively per usual. And they were just doing such a good job of playing passing lanes. And Towns was good in drop coverage. He played that really well. And I'm sure he's going to get some tips from Rudy. He's going to watch Rudy Gobert play it in practice and eventually in games. And perhaps Towns can figure out how to play drop a little bit better. Now, it's still not an optimal coverage for Towns to play. I worry about the foul trouble thing. I think the Wolves will actually just play a few different defensive coverages and mix it up a bit more than maybe they have in the past. They've got a veteran enough team now. I mean, Towns should know how to play all these coverages. Rudy can obviously do anything you want him to do. And if your third string center is Naz Reid, Naz sometimes struggles a little bit defensively. He's an okay shot blocker, but he's really struggled in pick and roll coverage throughout the early part of his still young career. So it'll be interesting to see how they mix that up. But Towns played well in drop pick and roll coverage in the third quarter of this game. And the Wolves overall defensively were really impressive in the third quarter. They gave up, I guess they did end up giving up 31 points in the third, but they were active and they created a lot of easy transition opportunities. They scored 38 themselves in the third quarter, which was 9 more than they scored in any other quarter, primarily because of the transition opportunities they were giving themselves by turning over the Clippers. And it was more due to the Timberwolves playing solid defense than it was the Clippers simply being sloppy. On the flip side, some of the transition offense was sloppy for the Wolves. They got so many opportunities, they were still able to score 38 points. But at times it was a bit, it was just, jack up a three or make a crazy lob pass. There were a couple of those possessions that were kind of just kicked away, but they played good enough good enough half court defense to give themselves enough opportunities to still drop 38 in the quarter. So, an impressive third quarter overall for the Wolves, and notable that Towns played drop when he was on the floor in the third quarter. Another key takeaway is the Jordan McLaughlin Naz Reid connection. We saw this throughout last year. They both played extremely well in this game. Naz, of course, getting the start at power forward and still playing most of the primarily the backup minutes at the 5 in this game. He dropped 20 and 11 in 23 minutes and was really solid, especially on the offensive end of the floor, but was okay on defense too. Jordan McLaughlin played 17 minutes, which was tied for the second most off the bench. Had 5 points and 6 assists, was really good, only 1 turnover. And J-Mac and Nas just look really comfortable together. And I talked after last Thursday's game that maybe Nate Knight could eat into some of Nas's backup center minutes. I said this a couple times on the show, and I'm just gonna keep repeating it because I already said it. It's out there. I thought, and I still, it's one preseason game, but I had been saying that I thought that Nate Knight could end up getting the backup center role away from Naz Reid. It's limited minutes anyway when both Cat and Rudy are playing, and Finch is staggering their minutes. But Naz played so well in this game that if the Naz Reid Jordan McLaughlin connection is as real as it has been last season and so far this preseason, Nate Knight's gonna have a really hard time finding the floor because Reid and McLaughlin play so well together in pick and roll game. Just have an overall sense and feel for where one another are on the court. And now part of that is McLaughlin is it seems like almost anybody that plays with Jordan McLaughlin, right? Because you got the D'Lo J-Mac, the no look cut thing that they did all last year. It was like every other game they tried where McLaughlin wouldn't turn his head and D'Lo would do the no look kind of late hands thing, like you see late hands with the receiver in football. McLaughlin would throw up his hands late, and they'd get a layup out of it. It seems like half the roster has that kind of a connection with Jordan McLaughlin, which is just fascinating to me. And that's the mark of a really good point guard, a really solid backup point guard. Also, I thought this was interesting that Wendell Moore Jr., of course, the rookie first round draft pick, he didn't play at all until the fourth quarter, which that's not the interesting part. Got on the floor midway through the fourth, and he just ran the point the rest of the game. And now it's maybe, again, there isn't a third string point guard. We talked about this on Friday's show. The Wolves have 2 point guards on the roster, D'Angelo Russell and Jordan McLaughlin. That's it. Basically, the third string point guard as part of the rotation is some combination of Jalen Noel, Bryn Forbes, Austin Rivers. But all those guys, Noel was off the floor at that point. His night was done. Forbes and Rivers are both on the floor, but Wendell Moore was the one initiating offense. And they made it a point to give him the ball every time down the floor. And I'm sure this was just a case of give the rookie the ball, see what he can do, make sure he knows the offense. Now Rivers was the one who was getting the shots up. He was the guy who was taking charge and ultimately was getting the shot off. But Wendell Moore was setting the offense up for much of the latter half of the fourth quarter. So I thought that was really interesting to watch. And he was fine. He did a good job overall, but I thought that was notable. And then the last thing would be Jalen Noel started the game so slowly. He missed his first, I think, 3 shots from the field. And then after that, he was 5 for his next 7 and finished with 11 points on 10 shots. Only made 1 3-pointer, didn't get to the line at all, but had a couple of tough transition buckets, hit a deep 3 off a handoff, and I think it was a handoff from Towns. Really strong game from Jalen Noel off the bench. And this is microwave scorer Jalen Noel. We're going to see this a lot this year. He's going to get plenty of opportunities off the bench. And what he did, mostly second quarter, a little bit of third quarter in this game, was a lot of fun to watch. Okay, let's close the show today by talking individual studs and duds. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. I had a good Sunday with NFL betting on BetOnline. Hit a couple of unders, hit a parlay, hit a teaser. Not too bad. And also, that I'm playing the 48.5 total wins over for the Timberwolves this season. That's an obvious over. Head over to Bet Online and play that now before that number starts to shift. Not that the preseason record should make it shift at all, but you never know. I don't think that number is going to stick at 48.5 much longer. We're only a week away from the start of the regular season. So get on that now. As always, Bet Online remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, which is now in the playoffs, NHL, which is just starting up, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet Online, where the game starts. All right, as part of our regular post-game podcast rhythm, we'll do studs and duds to close. And for the second straight game, I'm not going to do any duds. And here's the thing. It's not just because it's preseason. It's because nobody plays long enough, and the teams aren't really, like, they're trying to win, but they're not playing their real rotation. They're not playing their rotation guys at the end of the game. I'm not going to sit here and say that so-and-so was a dud in 4 minutes because they missed both of their shots. That doesn't make sense. Unless there was a real obvious like starter that played a terrible game. That's not the case. Everyone played pretty well for the Wolves. But normally I'll call one or two duds, guys that just didn't have a strong game. But that didn't really happen here. So we'll do 3 studs today. Number 1 for me has to be Naz Reid. 20 points, 11 rebounds, 2 assists, a block and a steal, only 1 turnover in 23 minutes. Shot a sizzling 9 of 13 from the floor. He missed his only 2 3-point attempts. So 9 of 11 on twos in this game, 2 of 2 at the line, and was really good. He was the only starter, by the way. This is weird. The only starter with a negative plus minus. I'll say this a couple times at the beginning of the year. I'm not going to say this all the time. Individual game plus minus is real noisy, and it's messy, and I don't like citing it. This is why Nas was really good in this game. And he was a -9 in 23 minutes. The other starters were all positive. Now, Nas had some issues defensively. He always does, but who doesn't, right? Everybody had a couple rough defensive possessions. Nas played well. Don't pay attention to the plus minus. I think that a lot of times that particular stat can be very misleading. This was a good game for Naz Reid. Again, 20 and 11, 2 assists, a steal, and a block. Only 1 turnover in 23 minutes. The 20 points came on 13 shots. And Naz is really making some noise as, a true third big type player. All along, we've kind of talked about how Rudy and Towns were going to get their minutes staggered at the 5. So when they're not on the floor together, one of them is always on the floor in the regular season, with Kyle Anderson as the primary backup 4, with maybe a little bit Taurean Prince or Jaden McDaniel sliding to the 4. And now it really looks like Naz is going to get his opportunity if there are. And here's the thing. Like, we can be excited about Naz, and we should, but he may well still be the 10th guy and may see 4 to 8 minutes per game, because if Rudy and Cat aren't in foul trouble and they're healthy and they're on the floor and whatever, there just aren't that many minutes to go around. Naz is great. He's not Cat and he's not Rudy. So, but I will say, if Naz does continue to play like this in preseason and the start of the regular season, the Wolves may be more inclined to shorten minutes for Towns or Rudy early in the season, or perhaps if there's back-to-backs, rest one of the, if Naz plays this well, then it gives the Wolves options. And he's been fantastic through 3 preseason games and was really good in the win over the Clippers on Sunday. My second stud is Karl-Anthony Towns in his first game action since returning from the non-COVID illness that caused him to miss the first week of preseason or training camp, really, practices in the first 2 preseason games. He was fantastic. 19 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 assists in 26 minutes. 5 of 11 shooting, made 3 of his 6 3-point attempts. I loved how much he was squeezing the trigger from 3. More than half his field goal attempts were 3s, and yet he still got to the line, 6 of 6 at the free throw line. So 19 points on just 11 shots. Fantastic efficiency. 6 assists to only 1 turnover. I talked about this in the first segment, but he was the fulcrum of the offense for most of the time he was on the floor. Mid-post, high post, at the elbows, operating. They even tried to get him a couple of low post touches. It'll be interesting to see how much that part of the offense this year. And of course, those touches shrunk a little bit for Towns last year. That makes sense. But our team's going to be like, our team's just going to defend Towns a bit differently this year. And will that open back up? Because he is really good in the low post. Among, in the context of today's game, where not very many guys are, Towns is pretty good down low. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm not at all like clamoring for that at all, but it'll be interesting to see if that happens. A good performance from Towns, 19, 6 and 6, only 1 turnover. 19 on 11 shots, 3 made threes, 6 of 6 at the line in 26 minutes. My last stud is Bryn Forbes, the sharpshooter off the bench. I don't think he'll be in the regular rotation for the Wolves, but hey, if he shoots whatever this was, like, I don't know, like 90% from three, 85% from three, he will be in the rotation. But he's probably like the 11th guy right now. It's either him or Austin Rivers that might see the floor on any given night. I don't think they both will. But Bryn was fantastic. 15 points on 5 of 8 shooting. Well, no, this isn't perfect. A near perfect 5 of 6 from outside the arc. A couple of rebounds. And had the best, we'll talk plus minus, I guess. The best plus minus on the team with a +8 was just red hot. He's just got a quick release, very confident, super deep range. It really feels like he can make any shot at any time, and he basically did in LA on Sunday night. So the Wolves haven't had a guy like him really almost ever. Somebody that's that like confident and solid from three. Somebody that's done it on a big stage. Of course, won the championship with the Bucks a couple of years ago. Been in the playoffs most seasons in his career between San Antonio, Milwaukee, Denver. Just a really, really strong, solid player. And that's the sort of veteran depth. We talked about this in the offseason. The Wolves don't typically have the Austin Rivers and the Bryn Forbes as their 10th, 11th, 12th guys off the bench. It's usually two-way guys or guys on the rookie deals that have been around. They don't usually get that veteran depth. They have it this year. Their 6th, 7th guy is Kyle Anderson. He has that experience. Dorian Prince has great experience. Austin Rivers, Bryn Forbes. They've got these guys who have been there and done that. And that's super important. Bryn Forbes was fantastic in this game. And again, I don't know that means he's a rotation guy for the Wolves this year, but he could be. He has been a rotation guy for playoff teams. So really fun to watch him shoot the basketball, and he was fantastic on Sunday. All right, that's all on this one. The Wolves play again Tuesday night, so we'll go ahead and do another post-game pod for Wednesday's show. Otherwise, we'll spend the rest of the week kind of previewing what the season is going to look like. The first regular season game is a week from Tuesday. And a reminder, programming note, that this show, of course, is daily Monday through Friday. Now, every single weekday, we will have a show, post-game pods the following morning. We start postcast next week with the start of the regular season. So make sure you're following and subscribe to this show wherever you listen to podcasts. And a big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, free and available everywhere, including YouTube, Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey, anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken. And a reminder, you can get the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on either Roku or Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Wolves, plus all the other Locked On Minnesota podcasts are available on the app. More great local sports coverage 24/7. It's absolutely free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. We're super excited about this today on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Once again, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Podcast Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. A reminder that you could go check out the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview 2022 starting today, Monday, October 10th. It's a 6-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NBA season. The local team experts and the NBA insiders of the Locked On Podcast Network and Odyssey all combined into one Ultimate NBA Preview. Yours truly is on the Rise episode, so go check that out with hosts of other teams that are going from kind of that middle of the playoffs, hopefully to the upper echelon of playoff teams. So go check out the On the Rise episode for some of my thoughts, along with some of the other Locked On hosts. Simply search for the Ultimate Pro NBA Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.